Hello and welcome to the Indie Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Jessie Kwak. Hey, Jessie, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great.
It is lovely to have you back. And just to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background in case they missed your previous appearances, Jessie Kwak is an author, storyteller, and business book ghostwriter living in Portland, Oregon. When she's not writing, she can be found sewing, mountain biking, and exploring the Pacific Northwest and beyond. She's the author of thriller novels, two series of space scoundrels sci-fi crime novels, and a handful of productivity books, including From Big Idea to Book and From Chaos to Creativity. And Jesse, you've been a guest a number of times. We talked about creating your own community. We talked about is freelance copywriting for you? And we talked about From Big Idea to Book, which was a great conversation. And today we are talking about your, I think, third nonfiction book specific for authors, which is From Solo to Supported, The Writer's Guide to Finding Community. And I just found out about this because Jesse and I were both at Author Nation, and she mentioned that the book had just come out fairly recently when Author Nation occurred. And I was like, oh, we have to talk about that because I always love talking about community building with fellow authors. So I'm going to start out with my standard question, which is what did you see in your author community that made you feel like a book about author community was something people needed to have?
Yeah, so I have always been a very introverted writer sort. I mean, I think a lot of us probably are. It's a very solitary activity, right? And so you just kind of are sitting in front of the computer with your imaginary friends, and you don't know anybody else, maybe especially early on, that does such a weird hobby. And over the years, I've just met more and more writers, and they have become such an integral part of my writing process as, as beta readers and people who I bounce ideas off of my community of people who I can reach out to and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm having a hard day. My imaginary friends stop talking to me." Things that you can't say like to a normal person. And so I rely on that connection of writers so much. And I know not everybody has that immediate experience of having a bunch of writer friends. So I wanted to write a book about basically how to make writer friends and where to find them, how to talk to them, different ways that writers can connect. And yeah, so that was the whole purpose behind From Solo to Supported is you don't have to do this alone. There are a whole bunch of people out there who would love to become part of your community.
Well, I don't want to completely recap episode 237, which was creating your own community, but community was so important to you that you actually launched your own conference. So I imagine that was also like the experience of seeing how attendees at your conference operated. I can imagine that was also a lot of the input too from Solo to Support It.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a more introverted person, throwing a conference was extremely terrifying. But I just remember, early days of walking into my first conferences. I attended the AWP writing conference a few times when I was in college. Once it was in Seattle. No, sorry, it was in Vancouver, BC, actually. And so a bunch of friends and I went up from the writing program and were hanging out with all the fancy literary people. And it was just such an overwhelming experience, especially as a, very young person I wrote sci-fi, so I wasn't really literary. And so with the Author Alchemy Summit, I wanted to create something that was very kind of intimate and inviting in a way that sometimes those really big conferences aren't. But yes, I very much drew on all of my conference attending and organizing experience.
Was there anything you noticed about the interactions among authors when you were looking at it from the point of view of someone who was an event organizer versus seeing someone who is maybe there as a presenter or maybe there as an attendee or a participant?
Oh, yeah, I felt like as an organizer, I felt a lot more ownership over whether or not people were talking to each other. And so, as an attendee, I like to mix it up. I like to talk to people who aren't my friends, and I like to draw people into the conversation. So I tend to do a lot of that as an attendee already, but as an organizer, very much was like, that person is still over in the corner. Okay, I need to make sure and introduce them to so and so because I think they write in similar genres. Or, I've noticed those two are still talking to each other and they've only talked to each other this entire day. And I know that they're good friends and they both live here in Portland and I need to break them up and make them go talk to other people. So I was very much engineering this like All right. And a lot of, I did know because it was such an intimate conference, I did know a lot of people well enough that I could go over and be like, hey, you two stop talking to each other. Like, go meet new friends. Like, you need to go talk to this person. But yeah, I felt a lot more like, okay, how do I engineer more social connections here?
So I think that having read From Solo to Supported, I think it's a fantastic book. And in fact, when I came back from Author Nation, I'm always thinking about, is there a book to be written? Is there a book that I should be writing about building community? And then I read From Solo to Supported and I was like, okay, I don't have to do that because Jesse's covered that one. I think it's a fantastic book, especially for people who are just sort of looking for those first connections. And that idea of don't just spend the whole time talking to the person you know, I think is a great tip. And one that, eh, like, I consider myself not terribly introverted, but I'm also not someone who is seeking to wade into conversations with people that I don't already know. So I'm sort of like demonstrating introverted characteristics without necessarily thinking of myself as a big introvert. But what were some of those other things that you saw at your own conference and other conferences you were at that you wanted to share as tips for people in From Solo to Supported?
Well, to your point about wading into conversations with people, I think that is really the big thing that holds a lot of people up is that you show up and people are clumped in like twos and threes. And, normally you don't just go up and start talking to strangers. Like that is our everyday experience. You don't go into a coffee shop and see two people having a conversation and go up and say, hi, I'm Jessie. What are you talking about? Like you would not
Yeah,
be
that would be
invited
great.
back to that coffee shop. And so I think we have this natural reluctance. We don't want to go interrupt if people are having a conversation or that person's over there, writing or reading. We don't want to interrupt them. We don't want to be a bother. But what I would say is that in conferences or writing groups or things that are kind of more of these like writer networking events, that is literally why we're all there. And so it's not rude, it's actually part of the expected behavior. And so you have free reign to go up and sit next to somebody and be like, hey, is this seat taken? What's your name? I'm Jessie. Or to go stand on the edges of the conversation and kind of like slowly get invited in, or, people who are aware. And I always try to do this if I see somebody kind of hovering, like, come on in, we're talking about blah, 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 blah. So I think that's one of my biggest tips is that you are expected to talk to people. So go ahead and do it. It's not weird. It's not awkward. It's not rude.
Yeah, I'm thinking back. I mean, doing this right after Author Nation, having this conversation is really useful because I can think back to all sorts of circumstances that I was in, and I realized that the one of the ways that I paved the way to having that kind of situation be comfortable for me is to set it up in advance. And so, like, if I'm looking at a conference attendee list and I see someone on there I know, I'll send them an email ahead of time and say, "Hey, I see we're both going to the same conference," so that then when I when I approach them at the conference, the expectation is already there that I'm going to be talking to them, and that feels more comfortable to me. And then I also think just seeking out those situations where, for example, if there's just kind of a general mingle area and people are standing around and talking, I feel less comfortable walking up and inserting myself into a conversation than I do if, for example, everyone has just gotten their coffee and danishes and they're sitting at a table and now you sit at a table with them. For whatever reason, that just feels more comfortable to me. And I can recall a lovely conversation I had with a group of people by doing that, by sitting down at a table with them after with my
Mhm.
coffee and Danish.
Yeah, and that sitting down at a table sharing food, that's one of the things that I really wanted to do with the Author Alchemy Summit. And so I had breakfast and lunch were both included so that you could show up, the food is already in the space. You don't have to be like, I'm in a strange city, where do I go for lunch? Who do I ask? You just everybody got to sit at the table, break bread together, and yeah, just have those moments of conversation that you wouldn't normally while you're listening to speakers or trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, I also think that just being at an author event means that you, by definition, have a certain set of things in common with the other people. And whereas you wouldn't necessarily walk up to somebody at a cocktail party, at your neighbor's house and say, "Hi, what are you working on?" That's a perfect easy and a very fruitful way to start a conversation at an author event, because if you just ask people, what are you writing? You really don't have to say anything else if you don't want to, because that, off you will go.
Yeah, we have such a great, like, built-in networking icebreaker as writers, just, "Oh, what are you working on?" or "What do you write?" And I think, especially I've gone to some more boring type of conferences, let's just say, and you don't wanna always talk about your job, like, you but we all of us are very passionate about what we're working on, and so that's a really great way to kind of unlock somebody's excitement and learn a little bit more about them. And I would say, like, a little caveat on that, like, we sometimes can get so excited as writers that we want to just tell the entire plot and our entire world building system and the how we derived the magic, and 45 minutes later, you might notice that your conversation or partner has slowly edged away. So I
Yeah.
do include some tips in the book of, kind of how to talk about your work in a way that is really fun and engaging, but doesn't overpower the conversation and invites, you know, I think the big thing to keep in mind is that you're talking to other writers, not necessarily your ideal reader. So, you don't have to try to sell your book or pitch your book. You're sharing your excitement about it. And of course, asking questions about what they're working on as well.
Yeah, I think that's key. That idea that you want to be going to have conversations, not to make a pitch.
Mhm.
I mean, there are events where you are very explicitly there to make a pitch, but normally writers' conferences, like the general writers' conference, isn't that thing. They'll have like the specific venue or forum or whatever, where you might have an opportunity to make a pitch to someone who's there to hear a pitch. But you don't really need to be pitching your fellow writers. You need to be having conversations with your fellow writers.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that that point you had made earlier about the experience you had had of being a sci-fi writer and going to what was more like a literary focused event is really important, because I think that only in retrospect do I fully appreciate the importance of finding the right community and the right venues for what you're hoping to achieve. And that if you're writing, flash horror fiction, you probably don't want to go to the conference that is there to pitch New York publishers on novels. Find the communities that match what you're doing and what you want to do.
Yeah. And that was another point that I really wanted to drive home in the book, too, is that there are so many different types of writing communities and other different kinds of writers out there. And so if you stumble into your first conference or your first writing critique group or workshop or whatever, and you're just like, "Oh my gosh, these people, like, this is not for me," or everyone's really snobby, or whatever it might be, like, if you get a weird vibe and you're just like, "Ah, this I guess I don't make writer friends, or I don't fit into this community." No. It was just that group. Try another one. There's so many different communities out there. And so one of the kind of metaphors that I use in the book is about bringing people into your constellation as opposed to trying to join an existing community. I mean, you can 100% attend a conference and become part of that community, but I really encourage people to think about it more like, how are you bringing how are you bringing people and different parts of those communities and different workshops? How can you combine those in a way that is unique to you, where you are the center star of this little constellation of people and organizations, instead of saying, "Okay, well, I guess if I join this organization, I have to be just with this group." Like, there's just so much variety out there, and what you write is gonna be slightly different from everyone else, and so, just pick and choose. Pick and choose, so you don't have to get just embroiled in one specific group.
Yeah, I like the idea of approaching a visit to, let's say, a local writers group as almost like a tryout for them to see if
Mhm.
they're right for you. Because I think, first of all, that makes it less intimidating. Like, I think a lot of times people go into any kind of group and say, is this group going to accept me? And I think if you go into it saying, is this group right for me? Then it sort of changes the power dynamic a little bit. And, sometimes you can find these things out ahead of time, but sometimes the only way to find out is to, join to participate in the group for some period of time. And like you might be looking for, I'm really just looking for people to help me through my fake friends aren't talking to me anymore. And then there are other people who are looking for, I want like a serious critique of my work. And those are two completely legitimate goals, but pretty different. And you don't want to be going into a group that is set up to support one when you really, what you're looking for is the other.
Yeah.
So you do have a lot of great tips about finding those kinds of local communities. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, man, one of my goals going into this was to have, like, some sort of comprehensive list of, like, places people could go, but of course, that's so hard to maintain. We literally I was proofing the pages right before it went to print and realized that I had a reference to finding community during NaNoWriMo and to, like, go to NaNoWriMo.org, and it had like, the month or 2 before the organization had shut down. I was like, "Oh my gosh, we have to we have to take that out." So, we kind of nixed the idea of, like, let's have this big comprehensive list, and really I don't wanna say just Google it, but my tip essentially is, like, different ways to Google what might be in your area. But there are some really good I would say meetup.org is probably one of my favorite places to find local writing groups. There's a ton of them for some reason in Portland, people who are just getting together to sit at their laptops and work together and chat for a little bit, but mostly just work. And sometimes they also have a component of sharing work, but just there's tons of those little groups in Portland and I assume in other people's areas as well. So meetup.org looking for write-ins, I think is a really good place to start. Trying to find readings in your area. If you have like a little bookstore that does a lot of readings or places that do open mic nights, you don't even have to participate if that's scary. And it is, I still hate reading my work out loud, but attending some of these open mic nights, becoming a regular, starting to get to know people, that can be another really good way of finding local people. And then looking for a local writing organization or a conference. There are just the tiniest little writing conferences happening everywhere. I mean, I'm not doing author alchemy anymore, but we had 50, 60 people attending, so there are those tiny things happening all the time. So those are kind of the 4 places I'd say is like look for write-ins, look for open mics or reading series, look for conferences and local organizations.
I can imagine also that people who are just exploring community might still be a little bit unsure about what they're looking for themselves. So I had used the example of you might be looking for sort of emotional support, or you might be looking for a hard hitting critique group. Are there other kinds of goals that might not even be clear to the people themselves that they should be factoring in when they go looking for the community that's going to be right for them?
Oh, that is a good question. I think maybe just if you are early on and you're not sure what might be out there, kind of just asking people, like going with a goal and of saying, "Hey, what else do you do? What other groups are you a part of? And are they open to new members?" A lot of people might be in a critique circle that is just them and 3 of their friends, and they've been doing this for 20 years. But to say, "Hey, what other kind of writing groups are out there? What have you done? Where have you gone to find community?" I think that for me was a really valuable way of getting started and saying and just, asking like, "Oh, there's a conference in Portland or Seattle at the time that I did not know. Oh, it's a sci-fi conference? Oh, crazy. I've never heard of this." And I just heard about it through, a friend in a college critique group that I had. So I think just being open and being curious and asking that question.
Do you have a perspective? I think that from solo to supported felt like it was focusing very much on people who were sort of getting ready to dip their toe into community. So this wasn't like, I've built up a professional community for years and now I'm trying to decide where to take it next. But I do feel as if one of the things that I've learned over, you know, the decade plus that I've been in the writing and publishing space is that the kind of community I'm looking for evolves. And so the community that I joined when I first, I was finishing my first novel, is not the same community that I'm in now. I have joined genre specific community since then that, at the time I was first looking for community, I didn't even realize what genre I was looking for. Do you feel like the advice for people who are maybe further along in their careers, like how does that differ in terms of how they can make the most of their community once they're not looking for basic information or basic sort of emotional support?
I think it is still asking that same question of your writer friends, like, what are you doing? What are you getting community from? Like, I think there's kind of this idea that you want to be in the room with people who are at your level or a step or two ahead. That can be one of the most valuable places to be. And so if you have published, 15 books, but you're not quite at a full-time living because you're not really great at marketing. And so you're like, okay, well, I need to be in a room with people that know what they're doing about marketing. Like kind of look at your business and say, okay, what do I need right now? I need to be hanging out with people who can do cross promotions and collaborations with me. And, if you see a friend that's really great at marketing, be like, hey, where did you learn that? And who are you talking to? And who, oh, you're in that Facebook group? Okay, like maybe I'll join that Facebook group or take that course or attend that higher level conference. So I think still asking that question of your friends, because probably at that point you will have more friends kind of at the level that you're at. And there are, because I mean, there are kind of, I don't want to say like layers or levels of groups, but there certainly are like the more entry level groups and the more mastermind business level groups. And you should be looking to kind of join those rooms where people are ahead of you so they can pull you forward and inspire you and teach you things.
Yeah. Yeah, I was a member of a group for a while where some of the I remember going to one session and it was about like Facebook ads, and some of the people were evidently spending like tens of thousands of dollars on Facebook ads. And I'm like, this is so much not the group I should because I
Right.
just like had no basis for acting on the information that they were sharing. And one meeting like that was useful because it was cool and informative to see, you know, what does this one particular aspect of the author life look like in this mega form? But I did need to keep going because like it became clear to me that what these people were focusing on was not what I was focusing on. And while it was interesting, I wasn't coming away with really actionable things because I wasn't going to be spending thousands of dollars a month on Facebook ads. So I think another distinction is what are you going to hear just because it's always interesting to hear something new? And what are you going to hear or like what community are you participating in because you're looking for actionable steps you can take to improve your own craft or improve your own business or whatever that might be.
Yeah. And I think you do need to be really discerning about what you need at your stage, because immersing yourself in the wrong environment can really take a lot of the joy out of the writing or put a lot more pressure on you than you need or overwhelm you with things that you really don't need to be learning right now. I remember I spoke to quite a few people at Author Nation that were like, I just came out of this advanced Facebook ads session and now my brain is exploded. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, how many books have you written? And they're like, I'm halfway through my first one. I was like, you shouldn't have gone in there. Like,
Yeah.
not that you don't need to know that, but like your brain is exploding. And I
Yeah.
mean, I've been there. I like to learn the new things, but like you do kind of need to be really discerning about like, that's that's for later.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the distinctions that I've seen are rapid release versus not rapid release,
Hmm.
or multiple books versus not multiple books, fiction versus nonfiction, paying your rent with your earnings versus not paying your rent with your earnings, full time, not full time. And all those things are like the advice you get could be interesting. The advice you hear could be interesting, but those are all sort of like facets where you have to say, well, that was interesting, but only sort of academically, or, oh, that was interesting. It's something I want to act on.
And I would certainly say trad versus indie. I mean, I
Yeah.
think there is a lot more blurring now than there used to be, and a lot more. I have a lot of trad friends who, because most of the kind of sci-fi community that I had built originally here in Portland was very trad focused. And so I was kind of the weird one in the corner, not really talking about my indie stuff because I was like, I just don't want to get into it. Like, there's still that trad indie vibe. But I would say, like, in the last couple of years, I've had so many friends be like, "So tell me about the thing where you put your books out and make money." Like, "Yeah, I would love to tell you about that."
Yeah. I do think that is really heading in the right direction in the sense that it doesn't seem so either or anymore. And, there are enough very successful traditional authors who are exploring indie and enough
Mhm.
indie authors who've become very successful and maybe even moved into the trad world that I think that the graying of the distinction is really helpful to both sides and
Yeah.
makes it more possible. Like for me, I'm not that I'd always say no to a trade deal, but I'm a very committed indie. But I can imagine getting more useful information out of a discussion of trad publishing now than like 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think you and I both saw this when we attended Thriller Fest earlier this year, and you were presenting on indie publishing, but
Yeah,
just as an indie myself walking through there, I was a little nervous that it was gonna be very trad focused and very dismissive, and everybody was just like, "Oh, indie, okay, you can tell me about marketing, and that's so cool, and wow, that I know that's so much work," and I was like, "Oh." There was, yeah, just a lot of blending, yeah,
yeah,
and even in the presentations when people were talking about pitching agents and things like that, and they're like, "Well, obviously, if you're gonna go indie route, you might try this." It's like, "This is crazy." So, very
yeah.
cool.
Well, I like that. This is not a tip that I've thought about before in terms of community building or attendance, is the idea of going in and assuming innocence, I guess, not assuming that people are going to react negatively to whatever you're bringing to the table. And I mean, I have been in venues where when other people found out I was indie published, it didn't count in my favor, but I think going in and not expecting that, like if you expect that reaction, you're going to get that reaction because it's karma. But if you go in bold and proud and don't try to pretend you're something you're not and be prepared to explain why you're making certain decisions, but don't go in as if you're,
Like, on the defensive
yeah, it's on
already.
the defensive.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think
But
you do your own position a favor by going in with that perspective.
mhm. Well, and I think there's people aren't worried about us or thinking about us nearly as much as we think that they are. They're
Yeah,
that's a huge thing that I think everyone needs to keep in mind, especially when you're like, "Oh my gosh, I said that thing, and now that person's gonna be like, think so little of me," and, your brain is, like, chewing over the things you should have said differently or I should have done this. And that is just like 100% your ego being saying, "Oh, it's all about me." Whereas meanwhile, the other person is like, "Oh, I said that weird thing about, her hair or whatever." And they're overstressing about that. And so I think keeping that in mind when you go into any sort of situation like this, that assumption, like you were just saying, that assumption of innocence and like don't ascribe what other people are going to be thinking about you because most of them aren't going to be thinking about you at all. And they're just there worried about themselves.
yeah. I thought that your book conveyed that in an excellent and supportive way. And it reminded me of years ago, I went to a play in a small playhouse. And at the beginning, the guy came out and he said, you know what I'm going to say? Everybody turn off your cell phones. And why is that? And everybody, like a certain number of people in the theater who obviously went to all the plays said, because we're just not that damn important.
I love that.
It was really great, and it's the good side of accepting that you're just not that damn important, and exactly what you're saying, that nobody's as worried about what you're doing as you are.
Yes, exactly. And that's very liberating once you start
Yes,
realizing that.
exactly, exactly. Well, we've been talking a little bit about, how these communities change over time, and I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about what are the opportunities that come from these types of communities, especially for people who are maybe more experienced in their author career, things like co-authoring. Can you talk a little bit about how community can help those things blossom?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I like to think of meeting new people as just planting new seeds and seeing what might sprout in the future because you never know. I have done like promo collaborations with people that I've met. I I've co-written a book with a friend of mine that I met, I think 7 years ago. We figured it out at the Smarter Artist Summit. And there's been, I've been invited to speak, I've been invited to contribute to essay collections and short story collections and story bundles and all of those things that are, you're like, how do people get into that? Like, who do you pitch? Who do you talk to about it? And it's really all, it's who you know. And I want you to take that in a really positive way and not in a gatekeepy way, because you can go out and know those people. Like, they're there for you to meet. And if you kind of think of it that way, like, okay, every step of your career is probably going to be the result of somebody that you knew, as well as hopefully the merit of your work. But if you think of it like, okay, so how many people can I add to my little constellation of writer friends and collaborators? And what opportunities might they bring me in the future? And obviously, like, don't be a super mercenary about this because people can sense that. But just, I want you to have that mindset of, if it's all who you know, try to get to know as many people as possible, as authentically as possible, and you will see so many amazing opportunities come out of that.
Yeah, I do think that the indie author and indie publishing communities, because they're so generous, that that is an area where karma really does work. It should not be a quid pro quo, but when you do something good, it'll come back to you at some point. And I was just looking at, I was going through like my Facebook notifications for my business pages, and there was this one person, I think, who shares every post that I put up on the indie author. And I'm like, who is this guy? And I went looking to find out who he was. And, I don't know if I'm ever going to run into him or, get a pitch from him or anything like that. But if I do, I'm going to recognize his name because he generously shares pretty much every post I put up on the indie author. So building that community, like paving the way for building a more direct community. I think being a supportive member then makes it more possible for you to both benefit from that community and also offer benefit to the community.
Yeah, just think about, like, how can you be generous when you enter a space, whether that's just, complimenting somebody or helping somebody, holding a door, or how can you walk into a space and just be pouring your helpful energy out? Because that people notice that, just like you were saying with the person who's always sharing your posts.
Yeah, nobody ever says that person that didn't hold the door for me. I really want to like buy their book or to spend more time with them or do them a favor or something like that. And I know, Jesse, you've been such a generous member of the community. And I know that after last year's Author Nation, we would periodically get together and chat about what we were up to and introduce business opportunities to each other. And so that those kinds of things, I think, are a nice perk of the strong author community on top
Mhm.
of all those, a sense of belonging, a sense of support, information resource, and so on.
And it's just so nice to be able to say to somebody, "My imaginary friends aren't talking to me, and, it's been such a hard writing day," or, all of those. It is so nice to just be able to share your struggles and your joys with people who understand exactly what it means to find the exact right word.
Exactly. So fun. Well, Jesse, it is always lovely to speak with you. And I know your book is going to do lots of good for lots of people. So please let everyone know where they can go to find out about you and from solo to support it and everything else you do online.
Yeah, you can find everything about me at jessiekwak.com, JESSIEKWAK, and you'll find links to books and all the things from that website. My nonfiction is all, we've been talking about self-publishing, but my nonfiction is all out with Microcosm Publishing, which is kind of a local Portland press. So their website is probably the best place to buy those books.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Always fun talking to you.